The G20 summit in Indonesia has ended with a joint declaration that clearly condemns the war in Ukraine, even though Russia is a G20 member. The summit's closing statement said leaders denounced the war despite some divisions remaining among the group. Western leaders also met on the sidelines of the G20 summit to discuss the missile explosion that occurred on the Polish border last night. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz called for a thorough investigation, and he's warned against drawing hasty conclusions. Indonesia's president, who hosted the G20 summit, called the incident in Poland regrettable. So why did Russia, as a G20 member, agree to a declaration that basically condemns its war in Ukraine? I put that question to DW's Alexandra Van Namen.
Well, it's a very interesting question because, of course, you would assume that Russia would do anything to prevent the strong condemnation of its war on Ukraine from being included in the official document. And we put this question to officials, to Western officials here in Bali, and they told us that it was a success for the Indonesian presidency of the G20. They were reaching out, talking to every member of the G20. But they also stressed that Russia was becoming increasingly isolated here, with more and more emerging economies, India, for instance, being in favor of such a strong statement. So they assumed that in the end, Russia just didn't prevent this statement from being published because they didn't want to stand there totally alone.
All right, let's go now to Jade McGlynn. She is a senior researcher at the Monterey Initiative in Russian Studies. It's good to see you. It's a different story than it was 24 hours ago when we last spoke. Let me ask you, why do you think Russia agreed to this declaration at the G20 summit, a declaration that condemns Russia for the war in Ukraine?
I think that the way that they're interpreting the declaration, and certainly the way it's being spun, to the extent that it's being mentioned at all really in the pro-Kremlin press, is quite different to the way that we're discussing it. So it's the focus is very much on the notion that it's a sort of, it's unanimously agreed that a majority feel this way about the war, and so there's much more stress on that side, and also on the notion that really, the G20 isn't that important, that Western countries have tried to politicize it, and we see today that Sergei Lavrov has slunk off somewhat earlier than he needed to, which probably says all that needs to be said about the extent to which Russia has viewed that summit as a success.
Well, does it say that, what does it tell us actually? Does it tell us that there is a level of embarrassment, shame, or maybe a level from the Kremlin of disdain for what the G20 members represent?
I don't think it's disdain, certainly, because just for a start, China is a member of the G20, and certainly Russia is not in a position to be expressing disdain towards China. I would see it as frustration, but I think that even going into the G20, the expectations were very low. And of course, there were rumors about Sergei Lavrov's heart problems, which he denied, but which Indonesian officials seem to confirm. So that may be another aspect as well that's playing on the decision to leave. But overall, the expectations were low, and I think even those low expectations were not really met.
And what about China at the G20? I wonder if you think China was trying to have its cake and eat it too. I mean, right before the summit, the president of China met with the U.S. president, and they came out together condemning the threat of the use of nuclear weapons. Obviously, that was meant for Vladimir Putin. But you also have China as one of the parties at the G20 that was insisting that this communique not be as strongly worded in its condemnation. It seems like China is trying to dance, at the same time at two weddings, if you will.
Yes, it is rather. It sort of is having its cake and eating it. And I mean, I suppose from China's point of view, as well it might. They, of course, are a partner of Russia's. They know that so on many occasions they share. They have shared interests. They have sort of common interests, and I think it's fair to say common autocratic values. But that's not to say that China doesn't fully trust Russia. China does not is not particularly impressed by the decision to go to war, or at least has been very keen to make it public that they're not especially impressed by this decision to go to war. There were quite sharp words, not only from China, but also from India, when the nuclear rhetoric had ratcheted up, far too, I mean, any amount is too high, but especially high, exceptionally high a couple of months ago. So I don't think we're seeing anything particularly out of the ordinary. China's very cautious in its moves, and we see that continuing.
Russia analyst Jade McGlynn, we appreciate your time and your insights tonight, just like we did last night. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we want to go back now to our reporter, Grzegorz Ziminowski. He is in eastern Poland, where that missile struck about 24 hours ago. Grzegorz, let's start with the view from where you are there in Poland. What impact has this strike had on the residents in the village there?
Yes, we just arrived in the village of Przewodów, where the explosion, where the accident yesterday happened. You can see the police cars behind me. The police have cordoned off the area. Just a few hundred meters behind me, there is this grain drying facility where the missile struck and the two people have died. I was able to speak to the head of this community here just half an hour ago. He was visibly tired, exhausted, beat down, you could even say, but and he said that people here are really hoping that these news we all heard today, that this in fact was a Ukrainian anti-aircraft missile and not a Russian one, that this news proves to be true, and this in fact has been indeed a tragic accident and not a beginning of a possibly bigger conflict. So there is also a sense of grief he was talking about. He said that these two people that were killed, these two men, were well liked here. This is a very close-knit community. It's just 400 people village. So, he said that there is a long way to go for them, but they are strong together and they will overcome the situation.
And Grzegorz, how worried are people in the border area there? How worried are they that this could happen again? A lot of people are saying they're surprised that it didn't happen sooner.
Right. Just as I said, I think this is a mixture of this fear and terror with some sort of a relief that this day today brought. We are hearing de-escalatory rhetorics on the political level, so people here hope that this will stay this way, or that this will prove to be true, because they know that should anything happen, they are the first ones to really experience this. They told me that they experienced this very well right at the beginning of the Russian invasion this year. Since the 24th of February, the people here, we are just 6 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. These are the people here that were, the first ones to receive Ukrainian refugees. So they say they've grown closer together as a community. Due to this extreme situation, and even one of the men that died today, that was killed yesterday, I'm sorry, was known in the community for going very often to the border, for helping the Ukrainian refugees. So they are experiencing this conflict here very intensively.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, we could talk about it from a distance, but where you are, I mean, it is right there. It's impossible to ignore. DW's Grzegorz Ziminowski reporting tonight from Poland. Thank you.